Today we are going to break down my top 5 approaches to fishing smallmouth bass during the spawn of the year. Okay, over the next 3, 4, maybe even 5 months, depending on where in the country you live, the smallmouth spawn is going to start to shift from the south through the Midwest and up north. And this can be one of the most exciting times of the year to catch them. Sight fishing them, but also catching them on the way in, on the way out, some of our favorite ways to get them. So if you guys want to talk smallmouth during the spawn, let's go.
Welcome to the Hookup Tackle. The Hookup Tackle is the world's largest showcase of Megabass products, featuring baits and colors not found at any other dealer. The Hookup also offers a wide display of OSP, Evergreen, Depths, Lucky Craft, Jackal, and many more. The Hookup Tackle is owned and operated by family, is staffed by guides and verified tackle nerds who love helping anglers elevate their craft. If you're in the Phoenix area, we'd love to have you stop by our showroom and check out the wonderful world of Megabass and the Hookup for yourself. If you shop online, there are almost 10,000 SKUs of Megabass products alone, with hundreds of other companies and new products being added daily. So next time you're looking for that hard to find bait, that color your fish have never seen before, or maybe you just want to elevate your game, look at thehookuptackle.com.
All right, welcome back, my friends. I am Ben with the Hookup Tackle, aka the Tackle Otaku on Instagram, being joined once again by CJ, Desert Bass on Instagram. We're the Hookup Tackle USA. So, CJ, we did a video talking about largemouth bass and kind of our 5-prong approach to fishing them during the spawn. All right, if you guys didn't catch that, you can catch it right here. CJ will leave a link to it. Today we're going to do the same thing. We're going to talk about our 5-prong approach to spawn fishing for smallmouth. Okay, so different species of fish, they act similar a lot of times, but they position differently, typically in different types of environments. Generally they're in deeper, clearer waters, rockier environments where largemouth tend to go, way up into weeds and trees and that kind of stuff. So we approach it a little bit differently, right? So this is kind of our take on this spawn season, what we would do from sunup to sundown and how we kind of break down the day and the baits that are really, really critical to this time of the year. So starting out first thing in the morning, right? Let's say we're fishing an area, whether it's a river, a lake, spawn is starting to happen. And with smallmouth have this amazing way to going from like winter to spawn like that. They're kind of a crazy fish, right? So, they could literally be in pre-spawn at 6 o'clock in the morning and full-blown spawn by 1 o'clock in the afternoon, right? So, generally speaking, in the morning, this is a time that I like to try to be a little bit more aggressive, try to pick off some big females that are maybe just moving up or aggressive, maybe cruising areas where they know they're going to spawn in, but aren't quite locked in yet. So, this time of the year, really tough to beat this bait first thing in the morning. Now there are days when they just smoke it the entire time, right? Especially if it's a windier day and the fish are juiced and they've got some aggression. They aren't quite specifically locked onto beds. They're kind of cruising and looking to warm up. A jerkbait is just an amazing way to get them. Now, I have 3 different ones here because this is, generally speaking, the best 3-prong approach for most places. Now, where you live, there might be a bait that's better than another, right? Maybe the Varuna catches them better than the 110, or who knows, maybe the junior size over a full size, whatever. But everywhere I've gone, I could kind of take this approach in even these colors and catch them really good. So typically for me, that would be a Edovision 110 in something like an Elegy bone, something that's got some kind of shock color to it, right? So generally a pretty natural type color, but it's got that bright chartreuse on the bottom. I'll couple that with another natural one like a GP stain reaction. This is a great one for me. It's got some white, it's got some body, but again, it's enough natural and kind of shock color to where they can see it, you can really key in on it. I'll mix in a matte finish if it's a real cloudy day, something like a matte shad or a matte pro blue, matte skeleton, any of those would be great. The other one that I have in the arsenal is a Pointer 100 DD. Typically I just throw like a ghost minnow pattern, right? So if you guys fish around a lot of perch or bluegill, you might throw like a gill or a perch pattern, but ghost minnow is just a very natural all-around color. So typically speaking, if the day is starting out and it's really flat, and it's really calm, then I'm usually going to go with one of the 110s. I'll throw the regular 110 when I want the bait to stay up higher and I want them to really be focusing on looking up. So, you know, sometimes that could be over deep water and I just want to see if they're willing to commit to traveling a long ways to a jerkbait. Other times that could be shallow water. Maybe they've moved into a big bay or a big flat and I just need to keep the bait up a little higher. The regular 110 is great for that. I'll go to the +1 version when I need just a little extra depth. Maybe I'm throwing across main lake points or fishing bluff walls or something where I know those fish are maybe still positioned on some deeper rocks. They want to move up but haven't quite made it there yet. I'm just going to put this down a little bit closer to them and make it a little easier for them to travel to get the bait. Now, the 100DD is an amazing option for rougher water mornings, right? So if you get up and the wind is blowing and there's chop, and it could even just be like 1 foot chop, but it's just kind of noisy and waves crashing and that kind of stuff, that's where the Pointer 100 is really going to shine a lot of times over the 110 because it just has a little more sound, right? So you get a little bit more noise. It has a wider movement, a little bit more aggressive movement. It's also a little bit more forgiving when the boat's kind of going up and down and your rod tip's moving and you need to kind of like jerk a little bit harder to make sure you're getting something. A lot of times if you jerk too hard on a 110, it'll wash out and you'll get your bait back a lot and that front treble will be wrapped around the line. It's just because you're jerking it too hard. 110 needs to be more of just a slack line twitch, right? So more of a finesse approach. But a lot of times if you're just in chaos, right? If it's wind and waves and sound and all that kind of stuff, then a lot of times going to a pointer will just let you work it a little bit more aggressively and still get bit. Now, the other thing I will throw kind of mixed in with the jerkbait is a glide bait. A big smallmouth will absolutely destroy a glide bait this time of the year. Typically I'm throwing something smaller, something like a Megabass iSlide 135, Slide Sommer 145, any of the gill patterns. This is a Baitsanity Explorer gill. Anything in this smaller profile is a great option. Now, smallmouth will destroy a glide bait. For me, I like to fish my glide bait pretty quick for smallmouth. So instead of fishing it really slow and having these nice, big, beautiful movements to it, like we might have been doing for largemouth 3, 4, 5 months ago, this is the time where I can be really erratic with this thing. I could even just swim it straight in, have a lot of movement. I'm just looking for a big, loud presence down there to just draw a super aggressive bite. Great way that first hour of the day, some days it goes all day, but that first hour of the day when you get a big one that maybe is just sitting up and it's just kind of supercharged, this can draw that reaction strike out of it. So there you go, my 1-2 punch to start the day, jerkbait, glide bait, we're in. Now, let's say we've caught a few and we're catching them in places where they're just not committed to shallow yet, right? They're maybe in that transition area where they're either suspended or maybe they're off a point or they're in a little bit deeper water and they haven't quite committed to going up yet, right? That's when I might abandon the jerkbait. Maybe I stay on it. Maybe I go to maybe like a +2. Right, or even a sinking jerkbait, right? Sinking jerkbaits have become super popular, especially with forward-facing sonar, right? You can see the fish are there, but oh man, they're in 18 feet. You could throw a sinking jerkbait, something like a X80 Magnum, right, from Megabass, something like that, and let it actually sink down to them and then start twitching it. So you could always do that. For me, more of the traditional way of doing it is just to switch to more of a deeper diving crankbait, right? So some of my key smallmouth baits, and there are a million great crankbaits in the market, but the Deep 6 from Megabass and the Blitz DR series from OSP, probably the best 1-2 punch for me when it comes to deeper diving crankbaits. Now, I'm mixing in this year the Super Z3 from Megabass because this is a new offering, right? So none of us really have experience with this bait this time of the year because it's new to market, but the Z2 crushed them. The last couple years, there's no reason to think the Z3 wouldn't be a deadly option for getting a little bit deeper. So the Z3 and the DR are going to be perfect for kind of tackling that 10, 12 foot range. Deep 6 is going to be a good one for that 15 to 20 foot range. All of these are great smallmouth baits. Generally speaking, I go with more of generally speaking, I go with more of crawfish patterns this time of the year, because usually when the fish are laid up in deeper water, they're still kind of feeding on craws or something that's a little bit slower moving on the bottom versus being really aggressive on bait, right? But of course, if you're in an area and they're chasing shad or they're schooled up around bait, then by all means go with more of a bait fish profile. But generally speaking, some kind of crawdad crankbait in deeper water is a great way to kind of pick apart those deeper fish if the jerkbait's really not pulling them up. Now, my third prong approach is if I started with the jerkbait, maybe I got bit a couple times shallow, or maybe I had some followers, right? Really important when you're throwing a jerkbait to watch the bait come in. Same with this guy, right? So I mean, anytime you're throwing a bait that's drawing attention to it, you want to read the fish's behavior to it. If any sign they will give you, take it, right? So a lot of times if I'm throwing a jerkbait and I can see like, oh, there's one behind me, and I know that they're 2, 3, 4 foot off, so they're interested enough to kind of swim and see what it is, but they're not really juiced on it, right? They're not like sitting right there and smacking it or sniffing it or whatever they're doing, right? They're interested, but they're still a little standoffish. That's when I switch to probably the single most successful pre-spawn / spawn smallmouth bait, maybe of all time, but I would say definitely over the last 10 years, and that is the Okashira screwhead 3-inch spark shad combo. This is just a deadly combination for big smallmouth that have moved shallow, that aren't overly aggressive. And the reason why I say that is because usually when those big fish move shallow, they're usually still going to set up next to something that's going to give them a little comfort, whether it's a rock or a boulder or a different type of bottom, a piece of grass, a log, right? Something they're going to kind of get up in there, start warming up, and then like, I'm going to go chill over there by that log, right? This is just a great bait to kind of see targets, not necessarily fish, but you can be in shallow water and kind of see like, okay, there's some boulders here, or there's, you know, a lay down over here, and you can throw this right down the side of it or right across the boulder field or whatever, and that little blade on that head will make a sound. It'll kind of be this little clacking sound, similar to like a vibe jig sound, where it's kind of noisy, where it draws their attention, but then the profile is just so small and so subtle, it's hard not to eat it, right? So whatever color works best for you guys is great. The two colors that are almost always on for me are Reel and Hiuo. So some kind of white, and then Reel is just a nice natural, it could be anything. It could be a bait fish, a goby, a minnow, a baby smallmouth, a shad. It just looks like everything, right? So that's a great combination. Now, there are times when that's the right approach, but that little blade can be too much for them, right? It's too much noise. Maybe the water is super skinny. Maybe the fish are really new, so they're very cautious. Maybe the water is crystal clear, and just having that little blade create that little clack is too much. So you could switch to the regular Okashira head without the blade, or a lot of times I'll just switch over to a little ball head. So a little Keitech ball head, you know, 1/4 ounce or 3/16. It lets me upsize my weight a little bit, but it lets me present the bait in the same way without that added sound. Now, sometimes too, I'll just mix up the bait. So if you guys live in an area where they're seeing a ton of spark shads, right, you could put a little hazardong on the back of this, or you could even put the little 3-1 HP Shadtail on the back. This is a deadly little swim bait. It just thins the profile down a little bit, but still gives you that shad tail kick. So it lets you just keep everything in that same kind of size, but it lets you mix and match colors, lets you give a little bit different kick, and it fits great both on the Okashira screw head and on the little ball head. So it's just kind of a nice one to mix in. I would say probably 8 out of 10 times, this is what you need, right? But every once in a while you get one of those days, or you get one of those fisheries where you just get a little pickier, and it's nice just to mix in something a little bit different. Small Keitech works great as well, so might be worth something to experiment with. All right, now, obviously, by catching them on reaction, it lets me cover the most amount of water, right? It lets me cover the most bank, lets me really fish quickly but efficiently. But if I'm just not getting bit, then we have to slow down, right? So, sun's coming up, we've thrown the reaction, and something's telling us we need to to change, which generally we're not catching them, right? So generally, if it's a clear water environment, we could go to bed fishing, right? And we could sight fish these fish. But if you're fishing a day, maybe it's a little bit windy and you can't see, maybe the water's a little bit murkier, maybe they're not quite committed to being on the beds yet, they're still kind of in a cruising mode, this is a great way to pick them apart by slowing things down. So for me, generally where I go when I slow things down is to a free rig, right? I talk about the free rig all the time. It's my favorite way to just kind of slow and pick it apart. What's great about a free rig is that you can fish this deep and shallow, right? So if the fish are moving up into the flats, right, you know that because you've either seen them or you've caught some, then you can fish this shallow and not worry about snagging like crazy. It's also a great way to where you could make one cast, you know, in 3-4 feet of water, right? And then you could turn around and fire one out into 14-15 feet of water, right? And you can fish it effectively both ways. Free rig's also a great way to cover a lot of water, right? So it doesn't have to necessarily be very target specific. I could just fire this out down a flat and I can just kind of drag it around. I can hop it, let it fall. I can drag it around, hop it, let it fall. I can fish basically the entire cast without having to go really, really slow, crawling it around, you know, very, very, just taking a lot of time up, right? So for me, for a free rig, where I usually start is with a 3.5 Dolive Beaver. I found that everywhere I go, that this seems to be the bait of choice for smallmouth. If I am fishing anywhere in the south, right? South or west, right? So I consider Arizona to be kind of like west, I guess. Anything with a green pumpkin is a great place to start, right? So again, adjust your color based on what the fish are telling you in your waters. If they want something darker, go with one of the black colors. If they want something lighter, you can go with a cinnamon or a watermelon. But anything green pumpkin is a great place to start. Green pumpkin chartreuse, dark cinnamon, blue flake, any of that is good. Now, if you guys live up north, if you're fishing any Great Lakes, anywhere where goby is the target, there is not a better color on the face of the planet than ghost shrimp. So every time I have taken ghost shrimp out, they have absolutely smoked it. It way outfishes green pumpkin, generally for me, out there. And it's just because it's a nice, pale, natural color with blue flake. So it looks, if you put it next to a goby, it looks just like a goby. They absolutely smoke it. As far as rigging goes, 2-aught style hook, I like the Infinity hook. Bellows hook's great. Any type of hook you like. Generally speaking, for me, a 3/8 ounce weight is important here because it lets me fish a little bit quicker, right? Now, if I know that they're feeding on bait, right? The beavers are great, kind of, it can be a crawdad or it could be a shad or it could be a goby. It could be a lot of different things just because it's natural. It's got this fall down and then it kind of has this quiver. But if I know they're on bait, if I know they're on shad or minnows or, you know, something like that, another great one that gets really overlooked, but it's definitely become one of my favorites to free rig is the 3.6 HP Shadtail. Now, we talked about the smaller Shadtail a minute ago on the little ball head. The bigger size is amazing on a free rig because it has kind of that same thing. It has that minnow fall down, but then when the weight gets to the bottom, it just kind of has that little horizontal, very subtle little fall. Again, I would go with that ghost shrimp color if you guys are fishing around gobies. But the other thing that's great about this is you can throw it in colors that they don't make in beavers. Things like, you know, neon wakasagi, morning dawn, you know, even, you know, great chartreuse colors and white colors. So you can just throw some different type colors that might be triggers for them when they're not eating something supernatural. So that's generally, when I need to go to the bottom, that's generally where I go. Now, you could go to a jig also, right? And sometimes I'll go to a jig. For me, the jig is a better option for me when I'm fishing smaller, tighter quarters, maybe a river, right? And I need to be super, super precise. Maybe I'm pitching it really shallow and I'm kind of dragging it in off the bank. But it's all personal preference, right? So if I go to a jig, I'm usually throwing, I like the 0-1 jig if I'm pitching bank. I like the 0-1 jig if I'm pitching bank. I'll go to a hunch jig if I'm fishing more offshore structure. This is a great kind of pitching jig. This is more of like a hybrid football jig for dragging around. Almost always, it's just a 3-inch Dolive crawl as a trailer. It's just a perfect trailer. It's a nice, compact crawdad-looking jig that lets me just kind of pitch and kind of pick things apart relatively quickly, right? If I have to make big, long casts and do more drags, I just find that the free rig is a little bit more effective for me. But none of this is right or wrong. It might be a drop shot. Like Jeff would probably just be throwing a drop shot the whole time, right? But this is a fun way. So again, if you're just kind of running bank, shadows, cliff walls, that kind of stuff, a jig is a great way to stick a big one. Either of these would be great. If you're making more long open water casts, the free rig is definitely where I go. Fly line, Shad?
Yeah, you know we're gonna get comment too. What about Ned rig?
Yeah. Ned rigs are pussies.
Just go right after him.
Yeah. You must be a pussy.
CJ, leave that in there.
I never cut it out.
All right, guys. So finally, let's talk about sight fishing. So sight fishing smallmouth can be an absolute blast. Smallmouth are usually way more aggressive when they have moved up to spawn than a largemouth is. Largemouth can just be little bitches most of the time, right? Smallmouth, generally speaking, if they have made a bed, they are going to protect it with every ounce they have, right? So it can be a really fun way to get them, especially when they're first up and they're fresh and they're juiced, right? It can be a lot of fun. Now, similar to what we talked about in the largemouth episode, for me, the easiest way to approach a fish on a bed and to get them to go is with a drop shot. So I'd say probably 80% of the time, this is the only thing I need to do is just drop shot form. And I like the drop shot because it allows the weight to sink down to the bed and allows me to move my bait up and down without it dragging out of the bed. So I can be very precise, I can make an accurate cast, it gets down there, and then I can just kind of shake my bait. Now, as far as baits go, this is pretty much where I live. I live on bed bait or the 24 karat magic, one of those two baits. I like a curly tail for the smallmouth. It's a little smaller profile, gives me a little bit more action in the back tail. It's personal preference. They'll eat the straight tail just the same. But I like the curly tail. I feel like I get just a little bit more movement out of the worm. This is a bait that I'm gonna throw out and I'm just gonna kind of shake it like crazy, right? Almost like I'm just season out, right? And I want that tail just to be vibrating right where those fish are, and it just drives them nuts. You can almost watch the fish go nuts until they eat it and swim off with it, and then you got them, right? So somewhere in here, almost always the smallmouth, it's a nose hook. For me, it's usually a spinning rod, lighter line, quarter-ounce drop shot weight, pretty straightforward, right? Same way we would drop shot a smallmouth during the rest of the year, just we're shallower, and we're using a worm that we can see, and these are proven colors that absolutely drive them nuts, so when they're shallow, almost always, this is the best way to just get them to go real quick. Now, if they won't eat the worm, then I'll just start experimenting. So I'll go with like a little craw, right? Or you could go with just any different shape bait on the drop shot just to mix it up and give you a little bit smaller profile maybe. But generally speaking, when they don't go to that, then I'll go to a little bit lighter of a free rig. So same thing that we talked about before, only we're gonna downsize the bait, okay? So instead of going with that 3.5 beaver that we're fishing more in open water, I'm gonna go to a little smaller, little 3-inch. OSP makes some great colors in these, like a white and a pink, things that are very visual for us as the angler. We can see exactly where our bait goes. I'll just downsize the hook a little bit to a size 1. I'll keep the weight the same at a 3/8, and that allows me to hit my target, let the weight sink straight to the bed, and allows me just to kind of shake that little bait without moving the weight off of the bed, if that makes sense. I like the beaver, again, same thing we talked about in the largemouth video, with just a little bit of shake, that bait has a lot of movement to it. So I can just sit there and just very lightly shake the line and just get that bait to kind of quiver closer to the bottom. So sometimes they want it right on the bottom, and that's when something like a free rig is great. Sometimes they want it higher in the column, and that's when something like the drop shot is great. Between those two, if that fish is locked on there, those will almost always jack them, right? Now, sometimes you pull up to a bed and there's a giant, all right? There's a 5-pounder, a 6-pounder, and you're like, holy shit, right? And you see this big giant bed, and you see that fish right in the middle, and then you see it and it sees you, and all of a sudden it's no longer sitting in the middle. It's 4 feet off the bed or 6 feet off the bed, and it's just circling, right? Has no interest to come back. You throw your stuff up there, it ain't having it. Way too smart for that. So in the largemouth video, we talked about a swim bait that I use a lot to try to bypass the little fish and go straight to the big one, right? So I will use this same bait for smallmouth, but I won't use it for them to eat it. I'll use it just to piss that fish off so that it comes back to the bed and locks, okay? So this is an 8-inch mag draft, okay? So we've just cut the harness out. We've put a 12-aught beast hook on there, right? This lets me put it on the bottom and lets me just kind of shake it around and move it around, right? So really easy for a fish to see a small little worm, right? And just let it kind of move on past. But all of a sudden you throw a full-size fish in there that could be a carp, it could be a bluegill, and now it's down there raiding what it's supposed to protect. The natural instinct of that fish kicks in, moves in to inspect. It might even grab it and try to kick it out. You're just trying to get that fish fired up enough to where it relocks on that bed so that you can turn back around and throw your drop shot on it and actually get them to eat. Okay, so this is just kind of a tool to use as a reset button, if you will. Doesn't always work, but I'd say half the time it works and it lets you kind of get that fish to reset. The other thing you can do is just remember where that fish was, keep fishing, come back in an hour and maybe stay off farther so you don't spook it, and then make a longer cast and hopefully he's reset at that point. But generally before I'll do that and leave, I'll try to put a big bait down there just to kind of shake it in place and piss him off to get him to draw in. If you're fishing with a buddy, right, one of you can be swim bait bitch, right, and the other one can wait till that fish moves in, and then you could throw your drop shot in and then pull the swim bait out, and then that worm is sitting there and usually they will strike. All right, guys, that is a wrap for me. That is our approach to smallmouth fishing during the spawn of the year. If you guys have questions, drop it down below in the comments. I will get to it. Also love to hear if there's anything that we left out that works incredibly well for you. Please share it. We want the community to grow, everybody to catch fish and enjoy the spring. Guys, appreciate the time. Thank you on behalf of myself and CJ and Jeff that's laughing at me every time I talk about drop shot. Guys, thank you for the business and the support. CJ will leave links to all the products you guys want to check any of them out closer. Have an amazing spring. Catch some giant smallies. See you soon. Peace.